Hello my dear students, and welcome once again to another video for our class in Integrative Programming Technologies featuring the Laravel PHP framework. And in this video we are going to make use of factories in cooperation with seeders to generate dummy data for our database. And of course, here we are in our Visual Studio Code editor. Already opened this project IPT 2020. What we have so far is that we already have migrations for users, categories, units, and merchandise, as well as we already have some of our models: category, merchandise, unit, and user. For this video, I will be demonstrating how to generate factories and seeders for user and merchandise, so that we can just issue a simple command to generate data, dummy data, for our database, so that we can have something to work with as we move forward. Now, the first thing we need to do is to check out our database folders. We have this database seeder which calls for the user seeder class, although this is yet being commented out. But we can also see here that in factories folder we already have a user factory. So if we look at the user factory file, there is already a pre-built code. This is by default here when we create a new Laravel application. However, this particular definition of the factory for our user table does not coincide with what we have in our migration, because right now our migration file indicates that we are having username, full name, email, and password for our users table, but that's not the case in the user factory. So we just have to fix this one up. First, we're going to change the name to username, and this will only be creating a fake name. But we are not going to use fake name for this. We'll just use a first name, so that the first name will be the username for every user that we are going to generate. By the way, the faker class object here is an instance of the faker class, which was introduced in this line here. And this is a very nice class that is used in Laravel that will generate value for us, generate strings such as names, addresses, telephone numbers, you name it. You can generate those things using the faker class, and that is what we are using here. In fact, if you want to see the documentation for this, you can go ahead and open up a browser and search for Laravel Faker API, and you can see this FZ Aninoto Faker. This is the actual package that is being used in Laravel. So if you click this up, this is a GitHub page, and below is where you can find the documentation for this particular package, and there's the installation, and below is where you can how you can use this package. So you can actually call all these methods from the faker object. For example, if you are going to call random digit, it's going to generate a random number. And we have a lot of possibilities here. Like for a person, you can generate a last name or a first name. You can even have a first name for male or a first name for a female. There's a lot of possibilities here. This is actually what we are using. This is by default inside of Laravel already. So here in our user field, in the factory, what this factory method actually entails is that you simply have to identify the field in your model, identify the field, and then identify what type of data are you going to generate for that field. In this case, we are using we are identifying for the username, and we are going to generate a first name for this, a first name. And so that I can reuse this first name for the full name, because there is a full name in our migration file. in our database structure, I'll just assign this to a variable, say for example fname, and assign it to there, so that here we can now add for our full name. By the way, we don't have this remember token, and we don't have this email address verified. What we have is username, full name, email, and password. So to continue on in our full name, we can now just use the fname that was generated earlier, and then we'll just add here a space together with another faker call. This time we're going to call a last name. Okay, so that's for our full name. And then for our email, we still use this one. We need our emails to be unique, so we have to call also that unique method, and chain in what type of data we are going to generate uniquely, and that is the safe email. And finally, we have the password. This password simply says it's the word password, but for simplicity purposes, we'll just generate a bcrypt call, and we'll have password 123 for our password. Okay, and save this one up. Alright, so now we have defined our factory. Now, how are we going to use this factory? We are going to call this factory method within a seeder. Right now, under our seeds folder, we only have the general database seeder, which calls for a user seeder. We don't have a user seeder yet, so let's generate that one. Let's open up our terminal and execute the command php artisan make seeder, and we're going to name this user seeder. And just like that, we now have a user seeder class. And in the run method, this is where we with what we did before was we generated, or we wrote a data, and inside that data we gave an array, and each array is going to be one user. But of course, that is not a very efficient way, because what if you are going to generate for example 200 users, or what if you need 200 users? For example, if your application is an enrollment system, and you have a class or a table for students, and of course you're going to generate, say for example 2,000 students. Of course, it's very tiring for you to write 2,000 arrays here. So of course you don't do that, and instead we are going to use factory, which is exactly what we are going to do here. So all we have to do now is call the factory method, and inside of the factory we just provide here the model that we are going to generate for this factory. Since we already have a user factory, we can now use that for our user model. Of course, we start with an app, and then user, and the class representation of that user. And then after that, we just put a comma, and then we are going to fill in here how many records are we going to generate. For this example, we'll just generate 20. And then finally, you call the create method. And that's it. First, we define our factory by assigning fake values or faker values to each and every field of our table. And then after that, we call a factory method and pass in the class represented by that represents our table. Since we are talking about the user table, it's going to be app user class, and then we provide the number of records that will be generated, and finally call the create method. So let's try this one out. To make sure that we start with a clean slate, we are going to remigrate. We are going to execute migration in fresh. So to do that, we execute the command php artisan migration fresh, and migrate fresh. And what this did is it recreated our database from scratch. So now our database is back to new. It's got nothing inside there, and since there's nothing inside there, now we can safely call our seeder, which by the way, our seeder the database seeder is going to call user seeder, but it's still being commented, so let's uncomment that in. So now when we call the db seed command, this is going to call the user seeder, which is calling this factory to generate 20 of the users. Okay, so save this one up, and now execute php artisan db :seed and press enter, and now it is successful. Now if you are going to check our database, going into the local host and into our sales table under users, we now have exactly 20 records for our users. And look at that, they are all first names, and the full name is also based on the first names. This is Mabel, and this is Mabel Puros, and Rhoda Stuber. And of course the email does not really coincide, but doesn't matter. What really matters is we have some dummy data for our database where we can work with as we move forward with our development. So next, let's try and generate data for our merchandise. Now, sadly, our merchandise table depends on units and categories, because under the merchandise table, it's going to have a foreign key for unit ID and category pointing towards unit table and categories table. However, it's going to be tiring for this demonstration to also generate for both units and categories. So all we have to do now is simply ignore the unit ID and category ID just for this purpose, just for this demonstration. So we can do that by changing our migration and giving a nullable method to our two foreign keys so that they will no longer be required. Okay, so now it's no longer required. We are now going to generate seeder and factory for merchandise without really worrying about the units and categories for now. That just for now, for this demonstration, because this video is only focused on seeders and factory. So first, we're gonna generate our classes. PHP artisan make seeder, merchandise seeder, and then PHP artisan make factory, merchandise factory. Alright, we have our two files ready. Let's first populate our merchandise factory. So our merchandise factory is going to be a definition of all the fields that we want to generate for our merchandise table. And looking back at our merchandise table, we have the following fields: product name, brand name, retail price, wholesale quantity, and quantity stock. We don't have to worry about unit ID and category ID for now. Okay, so first we have product name, and in product name we are going to generate what? Well, just going to generate a word. Also for brand name, we are also going to generate a word. So again, it doesn't matter what's the content as long as there's a content. It's just like if you are designing a web page and you're going to fill in some text, you're just going to use lorem ipsum. You don't understand what lorem ipsum means, but it's there. It's just a text placeholder. So this is exactly the point here. After brand name, you have retail price. Now, there is no generator for retail price for prices in Faker, but we can simply do randomize numeric value by calling rand. So our retail price is going to be from 2 and a maximum of say 250. We'll also do the same for wholesale price, but let's just start with 20 to 850. Next is the wholesale quantity, QTY, and we'll just randomize, oops, from 10 or 6 to 50. And then we'll have quantity in stock. Just copy this, and for quantity in stock we'll have from 10 to 500. Okay, and that's it. That's how we define our factory for merchandise. Now go to our merchandise seeder. All we have to do here is call factory. Oh, by the way, when the merchandise factory was generated, what it actually generated was just a default model. We have to change what model we are trying to generate a factory out of. We know we are generating from our merchandise, which is this. Oh no, not this one. Under app, this one, merchandise class. So instead of app model, this has to be app slash merchandise. Okay, so going back to our merchandise seeder, now we call factory, and here we call app merchandise colon class, and then we're gonna be generating 1000 records, and say call create, and that's all there is to it. Now let's try, and again, since we are seeding, by the way, we still have to do here call merchandise seeder after calling user seeder. So copy this and paste, and replace this with merchandise seeder. So whenever we call database seed or db seed, we are actually calling the user seeder, which generates using the user factory, and then calls merchandise seeder, which will generate records using the merchandise factory. Since we are going to generate data, we have to start from scratch or from clean slate again. So before we execute db seed, we have to execute first our migration from a fresh standpoint, and then we call php artisan db colon seed. And oops, we have an error. Let's check this out. Q2A stock doesn't have, we did not put any value for our quantity stock in our merchandise factory, did we? Yes, we don't have. And a double say wholesale quantity is supposedly QTY underscore stock. Alright, so again, also there's another way wherein you can do migration from fresh as well as seeding it within one command, and that is php artisan migrate fresh with a switch to seed, and press enter. So see, we have migrated and immediately seeded your user and then seeded the merchandise as well. So if we check our database once again, and if we click on users, we have 20 users, and if we click on merchandise, we have 1000 merchandise. Okay, so that is how you can generate seeders. Now, how about the problem with merchandise depending on units and categories? Okay, so that's let's talk about that. In this particular scenario, we don't actually need to use factory to generate units as well as generate categories, because there are only a handful of units. You have kilos, sacks, bottles. I mean, you can count them within the fingers of your hand. So you can just generate it so that you'll really have control as to what they are, instead of using a faker word. Also with category, you have beverages, you have foods, whatnot. So those are just simple categories. Maybe we can have 5 categories and maybe another 5 units. That's all that we need. So we don't really need the factory for that. what we do need is a seeder for both unit and category. And once we have that, we can now update our merchandise factory so that we are now going to generate randomly our unit ID and category ID. So let me pause this video so that it will shorten, and I will write our seeder for unit and category, and then from there we'll work on updating our merchandise factory so that we'll now be generating random unit IDs and random category IDs. Okay, I'm back. So what I did on the outset is I generated the unit seeder and category seeder. Inside the unit seeder, I just defined some units: kilograms, pieces, bottles, dozens, and bunch, and then executed a create for all of them. Also in category seeder, I also identified beverages, medicine, food, accessories, and condiments, and again uses a for each to create all of them. So now we have seeders for both category and unit. Now what we can do here is add them into the database seeder, and just before the merchandise we can have a call for category seeder and the unit seeder. Okay, however, we have to update now our merchandise seeder so that they are our merchandise factory, so that it will also include in the generation of records the unit ID and category ID. So the unit ID will be based on whatever IDs the units table have. Now we know for a fact that in our unit seeder we created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. So we are sure that we have 1 through 5 as unit IDs, and we can use this information so that here we are going to use rand 1, 5 for our unit ID. Also, this is how we are also going to do with our merchant category ID, and we're also going to be random. Let's take a look at our category seeder. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, also 5 categories, so 1 through 5. That is now how our merchandise factory would look like. So now let's generate them all by simply calling again PHP artisan migrate fresh and adding in the seed what's this switch, and now we are generating users, categories, units, and as well as merchandise seeder. Now if we are going to look at our database, let's refresh our database. We now have categories also for units, and our merchandise we now have unit IDs and category IDs. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope that you have learned what you need to learn, and once again, see you again in the next one. Thank you so much.